Chapter 19, The Strength of My Weakness. How many of us have things we wish we could change about ourselves? I think it's pretty clear by now that we all have insecurities or weaknesses that we would rather hide than share, let alone boast about, right? So I wonder why we feel the need to always pretend. Allow me to boast a little for just a moment. I am a terrible speller. I don't always say the right thing, and the best part of me is that I'm in a wheelchair. Do you see what I did there? I just bragged about my weaknesses. Do you see what I did there? I just bragged about my weaknesses. And the best part of me, I am in a wheelchair. Do you see what I did there? I just bragged about my weaknesses. I also fought with my editor to let me keep those 2 misspelled words, just for added effects. We never boast about our weaknesses, do we? We live in a world where every Facebook post and Instagram story captures smiling faces and thrilling adventures. It's a picture-perfect world where we only want to highlight our filtered strengths. Maybe you're thinking, Vianne, I thought you wanted us to be strong and courageous. Well, that's exactly my point. You see, we may have missed the definition of true strength and true courage. Along my own journey, in the process of understanding me, I would try to hide my insecurities and weaknesses, and that mindset left me frustrated and feeling worthless. I was in no way feeling strong or courageous. You see, when you focus on all the things you're not, or trying to portray someone that you're not, it will always limit your potential and hold you back. And as you've already seen, I have battled with many of the same fears and insecurities as you have. Okay, maybe not exactly the same, but like me, likely your list could include poor self-image or wondering if your life will matter. These lies form the walls of my paralyzing prison. What were the steps out of my prison, you might be thinking? Well, I've just spent the last 5 sections giving you a glimpse of that painful process. The short version is that I had to make some choices to embrace my insecurities and push forward. This has enabled me to reach beyond my wildest dreams and live the life of contagious courage that I now live. Was that a tough process? Absolutely. Did you know that people with spinal cord injuries are more likely to suffer from depression and mental health issues because of the trauma of having your life do a total 180? And if not treated, it can send you in a downward spiral and leave you feeling hopeless and worthless, with results leading to depression and anxiety. Well, that was my story. We all know transitions are tough. To believe that you feel valued or loved after years of holding on to the lie that you're not is a challenge that I understand can seem impossible. But let me assure you, it is not. It is possible for this transition to happen even if outside voices reinforce the less than lie you have believed. There is a story in the Bible about a man named Gideon. Do you know it? Many Israelites believe that their enemies' continuous victory over them for the last 6 years meant that this year would be no different. They had simply abandoned their fields and fled into the hills. Gideon didn't run, but he was hiding. He was hiding his harvest in the winepress, even as the enemy formed in the valley nearby. I like several things about this story, but let me tell you what I loved the most. When God showed up while Gideon was in his weakest and most fearful state, God called him a valiant warrior. Are you kidding me? Gideon was, according to his own self-description, as far from living strong and courageous as you can imagine, yet God tells him he is a valiant warrior. You see, God will always see you as you will be, not as you are. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. Let's read on in the story and pick up right where God meets Gideon. Seated under the oak tree, God began the conversation with Gideon in Judges chapter 6. Then the angel of the Lord came and sat under the oak tree as Gideon was beating out wheat in the winepress in order to save it from the Midianites. The angel of the Lord said to him, "The Lord is with you, O valiant warrior." Then Gideon said to him, "O my Lord, if the Lord is with us, why then has all this happened to us? And where are all the miracles which our father has told us about, saying, 'Did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt?' But now the Lord has abandoned us and given us into the hand of the Midian." The Lord looked at him and said, "Go in this your strength and deliver Israel from the hand of Midian." Did you catch that? I think it's great that God wasn't even the least bit affected by Gideon's question, or even the tone which he might have been using when talking with God. It was probably oozing with sarcasm and disbelief. I would imagine he was feeling let down by God and inadvertently saying, "You failed us, God. Why did you let this happen?" Does that sound familiar to you? Is there anyone out there who's being told that you can't get upset with God or that you can't bring your doubts and frustrations to Him? You are sadly mistaken. And again, I apologize if you've not been properly introduced to God, but let's keep going because it gets better. Picture it with me. Gideon accepts the challenge to step up and lead. The Lord continued to prepare Gideon to face the Midian army by confirming that He was really speaking to him. Gideon sounds the battle call, and thousands of Israelites who had previously fled began to gather. He was looking at his army of 32,000 men. And guess what God said to him? "You have too many." And then He gave Gideon these instructions, which resulted in him reducing his army to only 10,000 men. As a side note, the Midian army outnumbered them with forces too numerous to count. Can you imagine how Gideon must have felt as he prepared for the battle against the vast Midianite army with his only 10,000 troops remaining? But we aren't finished yet. If you know the story, you know where I'm going with this, so bear with me. However, if you are hearing this for the first time, get ready to be amazed. God tells Gideon he still has too many. You're thinking, what? Are you kidding me? What is the purpose of this? God had originally told Gideon, "You have too many warriors with you. Plus, if I let all of you fight the Midianites, the Israelites will boast to me that they saved themselves by their own strength." You have to read the whole story for the full details, which can be found in Judges 6 and 7. Or you can also find a small book titled Chosen, Conversations of God with His Mighty Warrior, written by my editor, which I've listed in the resources section. But ultimately, Gideon's army was reduced from 32,000 men right down to 300. Yep, that's right, 300. By now, I'm sure that Gideon is getting quite fearful again and thinking, "God, I can't. This is impossible." Can you relate to this story? I know I can. I know we have all pled with God, "Please let me go back to where it's comfortable," or maybe you're afraid to step out at all. I hope you're finding some courage from Gideon's story. Gideon pushes through his fear as God supernaturally gives him a word of encouragement. Then Gideon announces the instructions for battle. Get ready. Embrace yourself because it's coming to another one of my favorite parts. God sends Gideon and his 300 men into battle against the horde of Midians. However, they are going not armed with swords, but with a trumpet, empty jars, and torches. Can you imagine what Gideon must have felt? Or can you imagine the pep talk? for that battle, what it must have been like standing in front of these soldiers telling them, well, guys, it's like this. Here we are down to 300 men, and oh, by the way, each of us will only be getting a trumpet, a jar, and a torch as weapons. That was exactly where God wanted them to be, feeling totally outnumbered, with no chance of survival in their own strength, and totally dependent on Him. Gideon and his army surrounded the camp that night. On cue, they smashed their jars containing the lit torches, blew their trumpets, and gave a loud shout. The Midianite army woke up in chaos, started killing each other, and in their fear and confusion of being under attack, and the Gideon's men chased them out of the land in victorious pursuit. Do you remember my trip to Newfoundland and Labrador when I was speaking for the first time after my recommitment to the Lord? Well, my sister was there with me. She has been there with me through everything. In the moments just before we left for the service where I was going to speak, I was feeling so insecure and afraid. I felt like such a hypocrite. How could I speak about God's love and strength when I had failed so many times? And I still didn't have it all together. What was I thinking? I don't even know if I'm going to stay true to all the things that I hope for in my life. When I told her, she laughed and said,
Vian, nobody wants to hear from somebody who's not been through some shit.
Honestly, that was my own oak tree experience. I was heading into battle, feeling totally outnumbered with no chance of survival in my strength. Yet her words lifted something off of me that day that I can't explain. I know neither of us realized it at the time, but God used her to give me that same message that He gave Gideon that day. Oh, valiant warrior, the Lord is with you. Go in this your strength. We rarely think that our strengths could be a hindrance in the work of God. Yet it is harder to rely on God when we feel we are quite capable of completing the task without God's help. My guess is that if I didn't need Him, I most likely would attempt many things in my own strength. But the most amazing part is that God calls us in spite of our weaknesses. He then requires us to choose to trust Him. The option then would be to obey, as Gideon did. Without God fighting with us, we have no chance of victory. Maybe we'll be okay for a while, but the truth is that if we try to defeat the giants in our own strength, we will never do it. And we will always be limited. Gideon and his 300 soldiers defeated the Midianite army without having to do anything other than blow trumpets, break jars, yell, and then charge in hot pursuit. That gave way to a dramatic conclusion of this epic victory. I did a study on Gideon by Priscilla Shirer, and she said, if there was a movie review of Gideon's story, it would probably be this. From a state of fear, weakness, and insecurity, Gideon emerged as Israel's hero, filled with God's presence and His passion for deliverance. And maybe you can put your name in there too. Go ahead, reread that sentence and put your name in it. You see, I've come to realize that our biggest disabilities or limitations are often the ones we place on ourselves, you guys. My newfound freedom or success was not found in highlighting all of my strengths or filtered truths. Rather, I had to embrace my insecurities and weaknesses, and only then could I boast about God's strength in me. Gideon's story has all three of the elements that I mentioned at the start to watch for. That is faith, obedience, and discipline. Now in this final section, of how to live a life of contagious courage, I'll be including more stories of how my weakness and physical handicap have become one of my greatest strengths as I have put into practice all 3 key elements. My contagious courage has unlocked a level of freedom I didn't know existed, you guys. But the truth remains that I am simply a confidently imperfect girl who said yes to God. I pray you also say yes to God and allow Him to help you understand the strength of your weaknesses.